We're in for a real treat today. We're talking to Rebecca Wakefield, the Lincolnshire nutritionist. We have a 3-part special, and it's packed full of insights and information, helping us understand our nutrition, how it impacts our health. So let's get started with part 1.
Welcome to Happiness, Health and Relationships podcast. If you're looking for inspiration on powerful, healthy habits, you've come to the right place. I'm Angeline and I've been working with people for over 10 years in therapy. And this podcast will cut through the myths and misinformation on healthy lifestyle. I'll be interviewing experts in their field, providing top tips and motivation for 6 elements of living medicine. The 6 elements are reducing stress, exercise and fitness, nutrition, sleep, reducing addictive substances, and how to master healthy relationships. Let's get started.
I'm really excited to welcome Rebecca Wakefield today, the Lincolnshire nutritionist. So Rebecca is a registered nutritionist trained in functional medicine, and she's also a Masters of Science in Nutrition Science and Practice. So can't wait to get into our subject today. I'm sure we're going to get lots of top tips and advice. So first of all, tell us a bit about why you became a nutritionist.
Back in 2013, I'd never even heard of nutritional therapy as a practice. I did all my shopping at the NHS, so any healthcare concerns, went to the doctors, didn't think anything of it, not heard of nutritional therapy at all. And then my dad got poorly, really poorly, and he was diagnosed with cancer at the end of 2013. It was all very quick, but at that time, my passion was just literally just to look for anything that could help, anything that we could change, anything that we could do. And that's when I came across nutritional therapy and the amazing science that is nutrition and how it can affect our health and prevent chronic illness. So unfortunately, it wasn't in time for my dad, but that really spurred me on to start understanding more about holistic health and preventative health, because obviously I don't want to see my children to go through what I went through, losing my dad at a young age. So yeah, preventative health really sort of pushed me towards studying nutritional therapy, so that I can hopefully support people in their health journeys, and do what I can to help prevent chronic illness.
Yeah, I can imagine that was quite a scary time, actually. I can really relate to that. My mum, bless her, she struggled with her weight all her life, and it really affected her health. And it's brutal, isn't it? Watching a loved one go through that, really.
Yeah, well, you feel completely disempowered because you're in the hands of what we describe as conventional medicine. So that's treatment that you would typically get from your doctors. And you just feel completely powerless to do anything. But when you start researching it's amazing what's out there. And I always sort of align it to, I love using analogies, but if you're going to buy a car and you only go to a garage that sells one car, that's the only car you're going to come away with. But there are so many different car dealerships out there selling different types of cars. So it's important to shop around when it comes to your health to understand what therapy is going to be supportive for you. So nutrition is part of a team or a network of various different people that can support your health, like acupuncture, herbalists, etc. Find something that's going to support you and look around if you're not getting your health needs met by conventional medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we are a result of our environment, aren't we?
Definitely.
We've got so much going on and stress is coming in that as many of those holistic therapies that works for us, like you say, it's an individual thing, isn't it? It's finding what works for you as well. No, that sounds really good. Tell us then, what is nutritional or nutritionist therapy?
So nutritional therapy really is working on a one-to-one basis with the individual client in front of you. So it's not applying, this is good for you, that is good for you, off you go, Dr. Google type advice. It's working with that individual, with their health journey, understanding what has led them to where they are today, because that is a really important part of the process. What journey their body has been through to get to where they are in terms of their symptoms, listening to their story, looking into their diet, looking into their lifestyle, and then effectively using the therapy element to support them to make the changes that they need for a long-term effect to support their health symptoms. So everything that we do is long-term. It's based on making changes that they can continue throughout their life to support their health.
Yeah, love that. Playing the long game.
Exactly.
I've said that on a couple of other podcasts where it's accessible and realistic stuff to try and adopt. And we get so many messages, don't we, of this quick fix. Everything's a quick fix from social media and unrealistic expectations, really.
And a misconception, really, because nutritionist is not a protected title. So anybody can do training, etc., on the internet and describe themselves as a nutritionist. So the nutritional therapy element and the master's level that I have is applying the science to that individual. So a lot of people think that a nutritionist is simply about helping people lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just far more expansive than that. We can support in all types of health areas. We don't diagnose, we don't treat. We look at you as an individual. We can use various tests. We look at blood tests, etc. And we look at basically supporting people with nutrition at that cellular level. So it's a lot more complex and in depth than calories in, calories out, and weight loss. So yeah, there's lots about nutrition.
Yeah. And I'm imagining that the science is quite compelling around the efficacy, because I did a little bit of research around menopause and then found out that actually it's similar principles that help in all illnesses, really. My knowledge is very limited in comparison to yours, but the principles, the science behind it was quite compelling, actually. So I'm just interested in the science there, really, to tell us a bit about the efficacy of nutrition.
Well, everything that we do is evidence-based, so we can't make any recommendations to clients unless the research supports that. And the research is, obviously there's current research, but the research supporting nutritional therapy, dates back decades. There's just tons of information out there. And ironically, one of the things that I did when my dad was ill was starting to look at things that I saw on the internet, was, sort of checking that, looking at the NHS websites. And at the time, they didn't even acknowledge probiotics, which are now so mainstream and, publicly available everywhere. And so, yeah, the science is definitely out there and we use that for each individual. One thing I would say, though, is that science in women's health is still extremely lacking. And we weren't even included in a lot of trials until the 90s. So a lot of medications that are old have been tested on men. So it's really
shocking, isn't it?
important. Exactly. So when you're getting that advice, that one-to-one advice, it will be tailored to you and understanding what we can do to support you. And obviously helping you make an informed decision about your own health, which is, again, that empowerment. That's what is really important to me, to help predominantly women. That's who I work with, but I do work with men as well. Giving them advice so they can make an informed choice and then decide what is best for them, rather than somebody saying, do this, do that, for example.
So I guess on a practical level then, somebody turns up in your office and they've got some kind of chronic illness, then do you have kind of a prescription for that, or you have to adapt it? Is it a bit of a trial and error? How do you approach it?
So I have the luxury of time, which, to be fair to conventional medicine, they do not have that. So my first consultation with a client is at least an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. And the big part of that is getting that client's story. And it can sometimes start from birth, because there's so many factors that are super important into understanding why their body is in its current state of health. And it's not always about, I'm this old and I'm eating rubbish. It's about what viruses they've dealt with in the past, etc., what stresses, what bereavements, etc. All those little things are really important for me to build. I could describe it as like a jigsaw. I'm building the jigsaw for that unique individual. And the tools that we use that are functional medicine-based tools are looking at, well, where's the biggest area of imbalance in that person's health? So is it gut health? Is it liver health? Is it energy, etc.? So we almost work backwards and find that starting point where everything started to go wrong. And we have to address that starting point and support that. So again, I use lots of analogies. It's like dominoes. You have to find that first domino and stop that from falling to result in health issues. So a lot of the time when clients come to me with various health issues, whether it's weight or stresses or hormonal imbalances, that's usually a side effect of what went wrong in the body in the first place. So my detective job is to find out what went wrong first, address that and support that with nutrition or lifestyle changes, etc. So that then the side effect of that is they start to feel better in some of the symptoms that they originally came to see me for.
That's really interesting. So what I was wondering there was when you were talking about going back to bereavement, for example, are you referring then to like the psychological aspect?
Definitely.
Trauma?
Yeah.
Stuck in the body?
Stress is, in fact, to be honest, I would go as far as saying about 90% of my clients, most of their health issues are driven by stress. So, for example, after I lost my dad in 2013, prior to that, my health was fine. I was just living on rubbish foods that I now know are rubbish foods. Absolutely fine. Then my dad died, and that experience in itself started a cascade of health issues in me, particularly with hormonal health issues, stuff that I'd never dealt with before. So psychological stresses, particularly what we call adverse childhood events, can really impact on your health as an adult. Because when we're in our 20s, hopefully, and usually for most people, nothing can affect us. We're super strong. We can do what we want, eat what we want, have no sleep, etc. And then we get into our 30s and 40s, and suddenly the body starts to send out signals. This is not right. You can't keep doing this. I can't keep up with that, or I need this nutrition, or I need sleep, etc. And those symptoms start to creep in. So we go through a phase of ignoring those. And then by the time clients come to see me, their symptoms are unmanageable or they're really impacting on their health. So the sooner I can see somebody, even if you're in your 20s and you're getting those niggly symptoms, the sooner we can put you on that course again for those long-term health changes that will prevent those symptoms occurring in later life. But stressors, and I split them into two groups, emotional stressors or physical stressors from ill health, all play a really important part of someone's susceptibility to health issues.
That's really interesting. My mum passed away, and it wasn't till a few years later, maybe 4 years later, but there was lots of other stuff going on as well. Work stress as well. I was working in the NHS at the time. My health took a hit, and that's a few years ago now. So that's really interesting. And I guess what I was hearing there as well is that you were talking about how that it impacts all the 6 pillars of living medicine, if you like. You were talking about sleep and stress and the physical elements to it as well. It really is true that the 6 pillars of living medicine, if you like, each impact the other.
Yeah.
That's what I was hearing from what you were saying there.
And that's one of the reasons why conventional medicine really struggles with chronic health issues, because if you've got stomach pains, they'll send you to a gastroenterologist. Whatever part of the body is affected, you'll see that specialist. But because that part of the body may be affected by other aspects of our health in other areas of the body, it's all intertwined. So again, nutritional therapy is looking at a holistic perspective, looking at how the gut affects the brain or the mood or energy levels, etc. So everything is interlinked, and you have to look at the whole body as one to understand where's the worst area of imbalance, to focus on that to support other areas in the body.
And the other thing I was thinking there as well is really interesting, because there are some studies that suggest that things like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome has been linked with developmental trauma, which is a little bit more subtle. Somebody might say, I didn't have a terrible childhood, it was okay, it was good. But sometimes just simple things like parents were busy, so maybe they weren't as emotionally available. Just subtle things like that then make us kind of sometimes paddle our own canoe. We learn to be self-sufficient. We struggle to connect with people on an emotional level in adult relationships and things like that. So it's just another aspect of what you were saying there. But yeah, the impact of that is much more subtle, but it's termed developmental trauma, and it has been linked with some of these chronic illnesses.
Yeah, and I think that's why understanding that person's health journey is also really important, because you could have 2 people have the same sort of developmental trauma that you're discussing, but then another one of those people could have issues with their diet or not eating very well or have certain medications for an illness that they get. So that all compounds to that person's susceptibility, whereas one person might cope okay and not go on to develop chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, etc. Whereas that other person in their health journey had all those other little knocks and they start to build. It's like the straw that broke the camel's back. Gathering that information is vital for us to understand what the journey the body has been through to support that.
That's amazing because, like you say, it's just taking all the factors because they're all relevant.
Yeah.
And again, like with the 6 pillars, if we just try and adopt, which, you know, I know that I've done in the past, you join the gym and it's horrible because then, you know, that old message of eat less, exercise more.
Yeah, I hate that.
That's terrible, isn't it?
It's really difficult because if I do, I mean, to be fair, I don't tend to prioritize working with clients. I only want to see me about their weight, simply because there's a whole cultural aspect behind that, and you almost have to rewire their way of thinking before you can even start to make any impact. So I definitely prefer working with clients that are concerned about their health first and weight as a side effect. But yes, definitely working on that sort of mindset is really important.
Yeah, I think that that's really helpful because the weight loss comes, doesn't it? You know, if we're eating better, if we're meeting our nutritional needs, then we're not hungry. Whereas if we're eating, and we're going to get into some of the impacts on some of the processed foods that we really should be avoiding. But, you know, we don't get hungry, do we? When we're eating good nutritional food, it satisfies us, basically. Yeah. Whereas versus salt and sugar that are addictive, we want more and more of them, don't we?
And nothing is simplistic. So we've just briefly talked about chronic fatigue and weight loss. But again, depending on that individual, there's so many different reasons why that person developed chronic fatigue or why that person is struggling to lose weight. So it's never just one thing. There's usually multiple factors, and identifying all of them. And again, I describe it as like peeling the layers of an onion. You can find a lot of them and set that straight and they're feeling better. But sometimes there's another element that they're just still not exactly where they want to be. So we have to delve a little bit deeper, dig a little bit deeper to understand what is going on. But yeah, it's never straightforward, oh, I've eaten too much, that's why I'm overweight. Usually there's a whole host of factors behind that as well.
Yeah. I would have never imagined because what you're doing there is going into the psychological aspect as well, really, aren't you? Which, if we don't do that, it's kind of just, it is a quick, you know, there's no longevity in that.
Yeah.
Because if we don't address the psychological stuff, then we'll probably default back to the old patterns, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So routine and habit, that's the hardest element for me in my job. I mean, I love finding out, right, okay, we need to change this, we need to increase these micronutrients, or, you know, there's issues with the gut health and we need to address all these pathogens growing in the gut, etc. I love all that aspect. But trying to support someone change their mindset behind, well, this is what I normally eat or I don't eat, for example, is really tricky. And talking about stressors, some of the clients are the hardest are teachers and nurses, because their workloads are unbelievable. They literally have zero time to put self-care as a priority, which ultimately is what I'm asking them to do to get better. But until they can find the space to do that, and I obviously can't say, oh, just quit your job, but ultimately the job sometimes isn't part of that straw on the camel's back. It's that element that is contributing to their health issues. And until that can be addressed, then those symptoms will persist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can relate to that. Not nurses, because, you know, they work long shifts. But I was working in the NHS, like I say, I felt like I had nothing left. When the pandemic hit and somebody said, you're going to have to spend the weekend on the sofa watching Netflix, I said, yes, brilliant. That'll do me nicely, which is a bad sign, obviously. But you know, sometimes when your job, you give your all in your job, you've got nothing left to. And I've spoken a little bit about this on another podcast. Culturally, we're not taught to take care of ourselves.
No.
we're taught to work, and
Well, it's like that factory ideal, isn't it? We go in, we work to death, and then we're replaced by somebody else. So apparently the new generation are starting to find better balance, and obviously there's a flexibility now, being able to work from home. So we're not spending all that time commuting from one place to another, or that's reduced, which frees up more time for self-care. But I know that there are studies that suggest that working a shorter week, and being more productive in that time that you're actually working is much more effective than dragging out your work over the sort of typical 5 days a week, etc. So
yeah, I'm a massive advocate for a 4-day week. I actually, in my experience and from working with people over the years, I think that we're not quite built for a 5-day week. It is too much.
But I think that only works if the environment that you're working in supports that. Because I have a lot of clients that are, in inverted commas, doing the 4-day week, usually women, usually mothers, and they've basically taken that 4-day week so they can catch up with everything else going on at home, but they're still trying to cram in 5 days worth of work in those 4 days. So the environment that you're working in, it needs to be supportive, and the workload needs to be to fit those 4 days. Then that would be sort of a nice balance. But then if you're running around doing everything at home, you're still not getting that time for self-care. So yeah, it is tricky. At certain stages of life, finding time for self-care is very, very difficult. But that's where nutrition comes in, because if that element is in place, then you're providing the body with the fuel it needs, and the nourishment, because nutrient density is super important, the nourishment it needs to ward off those illnesses, infections and things like that, and support your energy levels and support your stress resilience, so that you're then able to cope with the busyness that life throws at you. But if you're stuck in that busyness and you're eating poorly, then you are going to be more susceptible to the effects of stresses and that busyness in your life. And then that's going to grind on you until, like you say, you're going to have nothing left. So the sooner we can address that with a good nutrient-dense diet, the better.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking there, even if we were eating some fairly good food, but we are highly stressed, I was just wondering how that impacts, do we reap the full benefit of the nutrients that we're eating if we're really
Well, not
stressed?
necessarily, because that's where it gets interesting. And again, it's those mechanisms that are involved in the body. So if we're highly stressed, then we're usually in that fight or flight response. And the opposite to that is rest and digest. So if we're stressed, then we're not necessarily going to be digesting our foods properly. We're most likely not going to be chewing our foods properly. So then we're not going to have foods that are in a conditional way of being absorbed. So it's like, I describe it as a Rubik's Cube. The whole point of digestion from chewing onwards is to break down that Rubik's Cube into every single individual element. So if we're not chewing properly, then we get chunks of Rubik's Cube. If we're stressed, we don't have good acidity in the stomach to help break down that Rubik's Cube. And we can only digest, or should only digest, those small individual pieces. So that can then lead on to a whole host of health issues, because we're not absorbing our nutrients, and then that can ultimately affect our gut health, which then impacts on immune health, etc., etc. So again, it's that chain of events, that spiral, which all starts with that time to sit and rest and digest properly and be present when we're eating.
Yeah, that's a massive thing, isn't it? Being present with lots of things that we do is more difficult these days. That's the end of part 1 in our 3-part special. Don't forget to tune in next week for part 2, where we continue our conversation and gain empowering insights with Rebecca Wakefield, the Lincolnshire nutritionist.